Donald Trump, the 45th President of the United States, is known for his bold decisions, his larger-than-life persona, and his undeniable influence on American politics. But behind the public figure lies a man who, like everyone else, has faced moments of doubt, conflict, and regret. One of the most significant regrets that Trump harbors, a regret so deeply ingrained in his life that it sometimes haunts his thoughts, is a decision he made years ago, long before he entered the White House. It was a choice that would alter the course of his life, his career, and the lives of those around him. As a businessman, Trump was accustomed to making big decisions. From real estate ventures to television deals, he was no stranger to high stakes. However, the decision in question wasn't one made in the boardroom or on the campaign trail. It was a deeply personal decision that would have lasting repercussions far beyond his own career. It wasn't about choosing to run for president or the bold promises he made to the American people. It was a decision that was, for Trump, more human than political. In the early years of his political career, Trump was faced with a decision that many would consider a pivotal moment. This decision involved not just his personal aspirations, but the well-being of his family and his legacy. It was a moment where Trump felt the weight of his past decisions and the responsibility he had towards his children, his business empire, and the country he hoped to lead. Little did he know, this choice would later become a source of deep regret, a regret that he would carry with him throughout the rest of his life. The decision revolved around the path he would take during his presidential campaign. At the height of his political rise, Trump found himself at a crossroads. He had to make a choice that was not only a political decision, but also a moral one. There were many forces at play: personal, political, and public expectations. Trump, ever the pragmatist, had to weigh his options carefully. Should he prioritize his personal values, the values that had guided him in business and life, or should he make the decision that would guarantee him the most success and power? He chose the latter. The choice that Trump made, one that seemed logical at the time, ultimately became a source of pain and regret. It wasn't a matter of policy or political ideology. It was about the sacrifices he made for the sake of power. In the pursuit of success, Trump abandoned certain values and beliefs that had once been central to his identity. He rationalized this decision as necessary for his future, but over time, the emotional toll became impossible to ignore. As the campaign progressed and Trump gained more support, the internal conflict grew stronger. He had won over many with his promises and his ability to challenge the status quo. But at what cost? The decision to prioritize power over personal values came with consequences that Trump had never anticipated. His relationships with those closest to him began to suffer, and the weight of the compromises he had made started to take its toll on his health and mental well-being. It wasn't until years later, after his presidency had ended and the dust had settled, that Trump began to reflect on that pivotal moment. He would often find himself lost in thought, wondering how different his life would have been if he had made a different decision. If he had stayed true to his principles, if he had put his family first, could things have turned out differently? These questions plagued him, even as he tried to move forward and focus on the future. But the regret remained. Trump's journey from a businessman to the leader of the free world was shaped by many moments of triumph and failure. But none were as impactful as the decision he made all those years ago. It was a choice that would affect not only his own future, but the future of the country he would go on to lead. He had achieved so much, but at what cost? Throughout his presidency, Trump had made decisions that were often controversial, bold, and divisive. But deep down, he knew that the biggest decision of all had been made long before he took office. It was the decision to sacrifice certain principles in the pursuit of power, principles that had once been a foundation of his identity. That decision, more than any policy or political move, became the defining regret of his life. In the years following his presidency, Trump spent a great deal of time reflecting on his past. He often wondered if he could have made a different choice. The regret lingered, despite his achievements and the legacy he had built. He could not undo the decision, and yet it remained with him, shaping his actions and thoughts as he navigated his post-presidential life. Trump's regret was not merely about one specific decision in isolation, but about the broader implications of that choice. As he reflected on the years following the election and his time in office, he began to realize just how much his decision to prioritize power had cost him. His personal relationships, especially with his children, had been strained, his health deteriorated due to the constant stress, and his ability to maintain the public persona that had propelled him into the political spotlight was starting to falter. It was during these quieter moments of reflection that Trump truly understood the weight of his decision. He had always been a man of action, focused on achieving his goals at all costs. But in doing so, he had lost sight of some of the things that truly mattered to him. His family, once at the center of his life, had become secondary to the ambitions he had set for himself. His relationships with his children, who had once been his closest confidants, began to feel distant. The toll of his decision was felt in every corner of his life. Looking back, Trump often wondered how different things might have been if he had put his family first. If he had chosen to stay true to his values rather than compromise them for the sake of political gain, would he have been able to maintain the relationships that meant the most to him? Could he have achieved success without sacrificing his integrity? These questions, which had once been distant and abstract, became more urgent with each passing year. The regret wasn't just about a political decision, it was about the personal cost that came with it. One of the most difficult aspects of this regret was the realization that he could never undo the decision. He couldn't go back and choose a different path. There was no way to rewrite history, no way to reverse the consequences of his actions. The only thing left was to live with the consequences and perhaps find a way to make amends. As Trump moved further into his post-presidential years, the regret remained a constant companion. Despite the accomplishments and the power he had attained, there was always a part of him that wondered what could have been. He had sacrificed so much in his pursuit of power, and yet what had he really gained in the end? His presidency, for all its highs and lows, seemed incomplete. The victory that had once felt so sweet now seemed hollow in comparison to the personal losses he had endured. In many ways, Trump became a man divided. The public persona that had made him famous, the confident, brash businessman, was at odds with the more reflective, regretful man who lived behind closed doors. He found himself grappling with the internal conflict of wanting to be remembered as a great leader, while also acknowledging the personal sacrifices that had been made along the way. But it wasn't just about power. At the heart of his regret was the realization that, in his quest to change the world, he had inadvertently changed himself. He had allowed the pursuit of his political ambitions to overshadow the personal connections that once meant the most to him. His family, his values, and his health had all taken a back seat to his desire for success. And now, in the aftermath of his presidency, he was left to pick up the pieces of the life he had sacrificed in the pursuit of power. Despite the heaviness of this regret, Trump was not the type of man to simply wallow in his mistakes. He was a fighter, a man who had always pushed forward, no matter the obstacles in his path. And so he began the process of trying to rebuild. He worked to reconnect with his family, to heal the wounds that had been caused by his decisions. He spent time with his children, attempting to rebuild the relationship that had been strained during his time in office. He sought to make amends, not just in his political life, but in his personal life as well. Yet the regret never fully disappeared. It remained a constant reminder of the choices he had made and the sacrifices he had endured. And as he looked back on his journey, his rise to the presidency, his time in office, and his eventual exit, he couldn't help but wonder if the cost of his success had been too high. For all his accomplishments, for all the power he had attained, Trump was left to face the harsh truth. The one decision he wished he could undo was the one that had led him to the place where he was now. In his pursuit of greatness, he had lost something far more important. And as he continued to move forward, he carried that regret with him, knowing that no amount of success could ever truly erase it. Trump's reflection on the decision that haunted him was not just an exploration of his own failures, but also a meditation on the human condition itself. The story of a man who, despite his power, could not escape the emotional weight of his choices resonated deeply with those who followed his journey. It was a reminder that no matter how high one climbs or how successful one becomes, the personal costs of ambition can be profound. Trump's regret became a part of his legacy, a lesson for others who sought power and success, a cautionary tale about the importance of balance and the need to stay true to one's principles. In the end, Trump's story was not just about politics or power, it was about the human cost of chasing dreams and the price one pays for success. The regrets, the losses, and the lessons learned along the way were as much a part of his story as his political career. And while he may never be able to undo the choices he made, he could at least take solace in knowing that the future was still his to shape. For Trump, the journey wasn't over, but the regret would always be there, lingering in the background, a reminder of the sacrifices made in the pursuit of greatness. As Trump continued his post-presidential journey, the weight of regret never truly lifted. It was as if a shadow loomed over him, constantly reminding him of the decision he had made. He would often sit alone in his study, staring out of the window, deep in thought. The glimmers of success, the towering buildings, and the rallies that once made him feel invincible now seemed like distant memories, overshadowed by a sense of longing for something more meaningful. Despite the accomplishments and the millions who had supported him, Trump began to realize that the validation he had once craved was no longer as fulfilling as it once had been. His social media presence, once an unstoppable force, began to feel hollow. The constant attention, the millions of followers, the endless praise, none of it seemed to matter anymore. What Trump had truly yearned for was something more profound. It was the sense of fulfillment that came from knowing he had done the right thing, not just the politically advantageous thing. He had always prided himself on being a man who made bold moves, but now in the quiet moments of reflection, he questioned whether those bold moves were the right ones. The decision he regretted wasn't just about politics or power, it was about the compromises he had made along the way. He had convinced himself that he was doing the right thing for the country, for his family, for his legacy. But deep down, he knew that the choices he had made had come at a personal cost. The time he had spent away from his children, the missed opportunities to strengthen family bonds, the sacrifices of his own mental and emotional well-being, these were things that could never be replaced. In his quieter moments, Trump would reflect on his children, his sons, his daughters, and wonder how they viewed him now. Had he made them proud, or had his pursuit of power overshadowed everything they had worked for together? There were times when he would call his children, especially Ivanka, and simply ask, "How are you? How is everything?" It was a small gesture, but for Trump, it meant more than anything. The simple question felt like a way to reconnect, to bridge the emotional gap that had widened over the years. Despite these attempts to repair his relationships, the damage had already been done. The emotional distance was there, a result of years of neglect and focus on external validation. Even when they spoke, there was always an underlying tension, a reminder of what had been sacrificed in the name of ambition. Ivanka, in particular, had always been a close confidant, but as the years went on, she seemed more distant, more guarded. Trump couldn't help but wonder if his choices had played a part in that distance. Could he have been a better father if he had chosen differently? The regret wasn't just about the immediate fallout of his decision, it was about the long-term effects it had on his family's legacy. As the Trump family name became more synonymous with politics and power, it also became a symbol of sacrifice and loss. The Trumps were a family of immense wealth and influence, but that influence had come at a price. The emotional toll on each family member was evident, and Trump couldn't help but wonder if the cost of that influence was worth it. Looking back on his presidency, Trump also grappled with the political aspects of his decisions. The controversy, the impeachments, the constant media scrutiny, all of it had been part of the political game he had played. But even as he tried to defend his legacy, Trump couldn't escape the feeling that something had been lost in the process. The debates, the divisions, the partisanship, it all seemed so much less important now. What mattered more than anything was the sense of purpose, the understanding that he had made a positive difference in people's lives. But had he? His legacy, as he often thought, was a complicated one. He had managed to achieve great things, bringing attention to issues that had long been ignored. He had shaken up the political establishment, challenged the status quo, and made bold moves in foreign policy. But despite all these accomplishments, there was still that lingering sense of regret, that nagging feeling that he could have done more, could have been better. In the later years, Trump started to focus on his post-presidential life. He spent more time with his family, working to rebuild the connections that had been fractured. He started to speak out more on issues he was passionate about, not for political gain, but because he truly believed in them. There was a sense of humility in his words, something that hadn't been there during his time in office. It was as though he had come to understand that the pursuit of power and influence was never enough on its own. It was the relationships, the love, and the connections with others that truly mattered. But even as he worked to rebuild, the regret still lingered. He had sacrificed so much to get to where he was, and now, in the quiet moments of his life, he was left to wonder if it had all been worth it. Could he have found a way to achieve his goals without losing so much along the way? Could he have been a better father, a better leader, a better man? These were the questions that haunted him, questions that would never have easy answers. As time passed, Trump began to embrace the lessons he had learned from his regrets. He started to speak more openly about his mistakes and the choices that had led him down a difficult path. He understood now that the key to moving forward was not about erasing the past, but about learning from it. It was about recognizing that no one, not even a man as powerful as Donald Trump, could escape the consequences of their actions. The legacy he had once hoped to build, one of unshakable power, influence, and success, was now viewed through a different lens. It was still a powerful legacy, but it was also one that came with the understanding that greatness came with sacrifice. Trump had learned the hard way that no amount of power, no amount of fame, could ever replace the value of personal connections, family, and the choices that defined who he was as a person. His hidden regret, this one decision, the one he wished he could undo, became not just a personal reflection, but a universal lesson. In his quest for greatness, Trump had come to understand the true cost of ambition. It was not just the political battles, the media scrutiny, or the endless challenges that defined his journey. It was the internal struggle, the emotional toll, and the relationships that had been affected along the way. And so, as Trump moved forward, he did so with the understanding that the path to success was never as straightforward as it seemed. It was filled with hard choices, difficult sacrifices, and moments of doubt. But in the end, the true measure of a man was not in his achievements, but in his ability to learn from his mistakes, to grow from his regrets, and to find peace with the choices he had made. Trump's journey was far from over, but his hidden regret would always remain a part of him, a reminder of the cost of greatness and the price of success. If you found this story interesting, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more.